Kyle Sandilands once commanded massive audiences on commercial radio before his now infamous sacking. And on Monday, his new subscriber-only live show was launched.
The golden microphone is on.
It was the old Sandilands, but even more uncensored and with a political bent, featuring guests including the New South Wales Premier, Chris Minns, and One Nation leader, Pauline Hanson. So why do we care? And what does this new era of media, free of the rules of commercial radio, signify? I'm Samantha Selinger-Morris, and you're listening to the Morning Edition from The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. Today, we have two guests. First up is culture reporter Kayla Olaya, and then senior columnist Jacqueline Maley. Welcome, Kayla, to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Sam.
Okay, well, Kayla, you just listened to all 4 hours of Kyle Sandilands' new show on Monday. So I guess just tell us, is this Kyle unleashed in a way that he perhaps wasn't even on his, infamous radio show? Or is it much of the same?
Depends on who you ask. I mean, I've only really listened to snippets here and there throughout the years. In my opinion, the crude jokes and the sexualized jokes felt very similar. However, this is him going down a much more political route. He openly expressed his support for Pauline Hanson's One Nation, even having the leader herself come on and called her directly and held up the phone to the microphone and discussed, multiple opinions and views that they aligned in.
Okay, so I guess just tell us who were the guests and what were the major things that they said? Like, what are the moments that really stick out for you?
Oh boy, so much. So the first one we had was John Edward, the celebrity psychic. We also had Chris Minns in the studio, then Pauline Hanson via a phone call. But I should also add that all of these were occurring in the backdrop of horrific technological issues. So it was actually it was hard actually to hear anything that John Edwards was saying. And then Chris Minns, he was in the studio, but it cut out. You could barely see him cut the ribbon. Pauline Hanson was actually on speakerphone while Kyle Sandilands held his phone to the microphone and her voice was ricocheting.
Hey, Auntie Pauline, it's Kyle. You're on live. How are you?
Yes, good.
You don't mind I'm calling you Auntie Pauline in the press, do you? Because that's how I feel.
No, I think it's fantastic. Actually, I think it's a form of respect.
Oh, it is.
Then there was a stepson and stepmom who started dating and...
Wait a minute. A stepmother is dating her stepson.
Yeah, it's very much sounds like a porn headline writing this down. But essentially there is this Gold Coast couple which this woman started dating a man and the man filmed her in bed with his 19-year-old son at the time, and this was earlier this year, a few months ago. So they were the second in-studio guests of Kyle Sandilands Live.
Interesting. Okay, and so I guess this brings us to the next point, which is people are paying for this show, right? This is not for free. So I guess tell us what the financial structure is here. Like, how much do people have to pay? And is Kyle and his team, are they gambling on this show, making enough money to keep it afloat? Or is that just a given that he has a lot of fans, even though he, of course, lost his job just recently at Kiss FM?
Well, it's $99.99 to listen to this, and you actually don't really get the option to pay monthly or to trial it out. You have to pay that one lump sum annual fee. So even if you just want to listen to it once, you're paying that. So I'm sure that he's making decent amount of money because it is a subscriber-led digital subscription that, most media companies are taking. I mean, Kyle referenced throughout the 4-hour show that, he was very wealthy. He was referencing multiple multi-million-dollar contracts. So I'm sure he has enough in the bank to hold the actual show afloat.
Okay. And so I wanted to ask you about the tone of the show, because you said it was quite crude. So is this really just a bunch of men being offensive? Because at one moment, and I want you to tell us about this, he seemed to rebuke his manager and his friend, Bruno Bichet, who was on the show and referred to Kyle Sandilands' executive producer by an expletive executive, which you can say we'll have to beep it out, but just tell us what happened.
Yeah, so about 10 minutes into the show, Kyle's long-term manager and close friend, Bruno Boucher, was asked by Sandilands whether the new executive producer, Jamie Mayo Blasquez, was any different to last time. I'm assuming that they worked together at ARN, and Boucher referred to her as the C-bomb, to which Kyle replied jokingly, "Bruno, I made it quite clear to the ensemble cast that this isn't some potty mouth all boys club filth nest." So he kind of off the bat set the tone, but I would say if you listen to the whole 4 hours of it, I'm not entirely sure whether he stuck to that tone. There were a lot of, I guess, crude sexual jokes that were made at the expense of women or probing women in a way that I think felt a bit more vulgar than those questions being directed at men. And other than that, I would say it definitely took a much more political tone.
And obviously in the radio iteration of Kyle Sandilands' show, Jackie O was, depending on who you ask, his foil, his enabler, I guess the yin to his yang. Is there an equivalent on the new show?
So there's no co-host, it's just Kyle, but we do have 2 newsreaders, the first being Brooklyn Ross, who moved across from ARN with Sandilands, and then there's also Mary Madigan, who is a culture reporter for newscorpsnews.com.au, and she definitely was bouncing off Kyle a lot, and Kyle was asking her very provocative questions, very sexualized questions as well, that she looked and said she was uncomfortable answering at multiple times. But Madigan seemed to push Kyle into, I guess, different topics and was acting as that kind of like segue almost, more than I think entirely enabling his famous radio behavior on air shenanigans.
After the break.
You've got to go out and you've got to talk to the mainstream, so people who aren't particularly engaged in politics and who are what so-called low information voters. And you've also got to talk to the people who might be thinking about, that 29% of the population that's saying that they're going to vote for One Nation.
Jack, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So I guess what's your first take? What did you make of the decision by these politicians to appear on a show?
I guess Pauline Hanson appearing is fairly uncontroversial. It's not surprising that she would, because she has made a sort of, I suppose, political decision to embrace so-called people who are cancelled. And Kyle Sandilands has been cancelled very publicly from his commercial radio contract, and obviously she's done that podcast with Tommy Robinson recently. I think there's a sort of whole constellation, a whole universe of these podcasters now who are, I suppose, a little bit right-wing. I mean, Kyle Sandilands is not a particularly sort of specifically political person, but he's just very, I would say, reactionary and sort of vulgarian in his direction. And, obviously he's had a lot of public controversies, most recently leading to his sacking. So, yeah, it's unsurprising that Pauline Hanson would go on. And Chris Minns, I mean, he's a much more conventional and, I suppose, small C conservative politician, but he always went on Kyle Sandilands' show, I think, and he does a lot of commercial radio, and I think his media strategy seems to be to sort of make friends with everybody and just try to sort of project his moderate, reasonable personality and policies and hope that carries the day.
And so Sandilands joked about having the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, on his show. He said that he was supposed to call into the show. I'm not sure how serious that is. Now, we know that the two have a relationship. The Prime Minister attended Kyle Sandilands' wedding, and I believe he called Kyle after he lost his job, I think around budget time. So it would have been a busy time for the Prime Minister, and I believe he called him to console him. What do you think the chances are? I know you don't have a crystal ball, but that the Prime Minister would actually appear on this show?
I mean, I guess they're reasonably high. Again, I think Anthony Albanese, as you say, they have a friendship as much as we can tell. Anthony Albanese and his partner were guests at Kyle Sandilands' wedding, which, I mean, I don't know. Celebrity weddings seem to follow a different set of kind of etiquette rules, and they seem to invite a lot of people that you and I probably wouldn't consider close friends. But still, to be at someone's wedding, I suppose, is a sacred thing. And yeah, so they're friends. And I mean, Anthony Albanese as Prime Minister, his situation in the polls is not fantastic. I think the news poll that was out on Monday morning showed that he is neck and neck with One Nation in terms of Labor's primary vote. So they're both on 29. And his own approval rating is sort of sinking compared to what it used to be. So he needs to reach out and touch as many audiences as he possibly can. And as we know, the mainstream media doesn't have the reach that it used to. So it makes sense that politicians want to go on podcasts, particularly podcasts like, we don't know how well Carl Sandilands' whole venture will go. And actually, he doesn't call it a podcast. He said podcasts are for losers. It's actually a live digital show that you can presumably access as a podcast later if you want to catch up on it. But I don't see why Anthony Albanese wouldn't go on it. The only reason would be, that he's recently sort of gotten into a little bit of trouble with podcasts, controversial podcasts. So he might want to steer clear for a while.
Are we talking here about his off-the-cuff remarks about the Japanese Prime Minister's melons? Is this what we're talking about?
Yeah. Although if you go back and listen to that podcast, he wasn't the one who sort of made the ribald joke. It was the podcaster whose name actually just escapes me right now, but her podcast is called Bush Deep. But it was certainly not a particularly gracious joke to make about what is actually apparently a very revered sort of gracious gift to give someone, which is these rare melons in Japan.
Do you think that Albanese would perhaps get some political blowback, though? Because, of course, much of his constituents, of course, MPs in Labour, many of their electorates are very multicultural. And Kyle Sandilands has a history of making racist comments, discriminatory comments. Do you think that for him appearing on that show, I realize what you're saying is so true. He is lagging in the polls. His ratings are not good right now. But would that lead to potentially just some blowback, or do people just not care?
I think only if he says something silly like he did on that Bush Deep podcast. So, I mean, nobody, in the mainstream and certainly the mainstream media would never have known or cared about that podcast. Like, I'd never heard of it. I'm in my own little media silo. You're probably in your own little media silo. Like, we just sort of exist and consume what we consume. And this was something sort of well outside our own personal algorithms, if you like. But we heard about it because it was reported in the mainstream media, like in newspapers like The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. And then it becomes sort of a bigger deal. So Carl Sandilands is super high profile. And I think at the moment, because he's trying to establish this a live digital show. It's definitely not a podcast.
No.
He's trying to establish that. So I think anything he does at the moment will probably be reported. And if Anthony Albanese goes on, it will probably be reported. I guess the question is whether or not Anthony Albanese could go on and hold the line and not bite when Carl Sandilands inevitably tries to draw him into, controversial territory, whether that's sort of vulgar sexual stuff, which Carl Sandilands really loves to do in the manner of like a sort of 13-year-old boy who's completely debased, or if it's something more to do with kind of, I don't know, race, I suppose, or anything like that, which is a difficult subject at the moment. I'd be very surprised if Anthony Albanese got himself into trouble in that arena. So, I mean, he could go on, but he would just have to be very careful about what he said, I suppose.
And I wanted to ask you a question about this phenomenon, I guess, generally, with regards to politicians choosing to appear on platforms led by people who have, perhaps been vocally racist or discriminatory in the past. And in particular, when politicians go on these shows and their politics do not align. Like, there's obviously an argument for them to go on and plead their, more tolerant, perhaps, case to a wider audience. But then does it legitimize, I guess, those racist or discriminatory platforms? Like, what's your take on it more broadly? Or do you think it really depends on a case-by-case basis?
I mean, it's very difficult, isn't it? Because I think someone like Anthony Albanese and Chris Minns, actually, I think they would probably say that there's no point just talking to your tribe. There's no point just talking to the people who are more likely to agree with you, the sort of, the right-thinking people who read the Sydney Morning Herald or who listen to the ABC and whose media diet consists of, sort of progressive, sort of small L, liberal organisations that are more likely to agree with them. You've got to go out and you've got to talk to the mainstream, so people who aren't particularly engaged in politics and who are what so-called low information voters. And you've also got to talk to the people who might be thinking about, that 29% of the population that's saying that they're going to vote for One Nation. And you're not going to probably encounter them in the pages of the Sydney Morning Herald or on the ABC. So I get that. And also, you know, the more you sort of start cancelling people in terms of who the people that you speak to, the smaller your audience, and also, I suppose, the more narrow your message. Like if you're Prime Minister or Premier, you're governing for everyone, even the people that disagree with you, right? And so, and if you are a seasoned political operator like those two are, you should be able to hold your own in any sort of media environment. So, I mean, I'm a very pro freedom of the press and freedom of expression person. So I'm sort of loath to think that you should cancel or you should boycott certain people. You know, it's an individual choice. I mean, Carl Sandilands, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go on his show, but I'm very unlikely to be asked on his show. And that would be more for reasons of just his vulgarity and the absolute sort of what I would say the stupidity of his broadcasting, quite frankly. But I suppose you can't afford to be that sort of, I don't know, snobby if you're Prime Minister or Premier.
And yeah, I love that point you make that, you know, if you believe in the strength of your arguments, you should be able to make them anywhere. And maybe it's a great test case for, well, how strong are your arguments?
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think, like, you know, if the Prime Minister is going to go on Carl Sandilands, he's not going to get a really difficult interview in the sense of, you know, Carl Sandilands is not going to push him on, you know, on the finer points of his immigration policy or his gambling policy. It's just going to be more vibe-based. The traps for an interview like that are entirely different than they would be for an interview with, you know, Peter Hartcher of the Sydney Morning Herald or, you know, Sarah Ferguson on 7:30.
Or Jack Maley.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we have had him on our podcast, and I think Anthony Albanese makes a virtue, actually, of making himself very available. And I think that was the other side of that silly podcast he did, the Bush Deep podcast, is he likes to say yes to as many media requests as he can, which is, you know, a good instinct as a Prime Minister, right? Like to be as open and available as possible. But yeah, it backfired, I would say, in that situation.
Well, Jack, thanks for your take. I love hearing your takes on everything, so thanks for that.
Thank you for having me.
Till next time. In other news today, an industry-first Australian study has found mental health disorders have surged in people aged 16 to 24, particularly those classified as severe, which now affect around 1/4 of young Australians. 2 Green senators charged taxpayers more than $5,000 for flights and accommodation, and joined wild protests at resource company Woodside's annual general meeting, a day before a Senate inquiry in Perth into a proposed tax on gas. And we've crunched the numbers and have your 26 favorite all-time good food recipes. You can read more at theage.com.au or smh.com.au. Today's episode was produced by Josh Towers. Our executive producer is Tammy Mills, and our podcasts are overseen by Lisa Muxworthy and Tom McKendrick. If you like our show, follow The Morning Edition and leave a review for us on Apple or Spotify. Thanks for listening.